Today I want to really talk about two books that I've read recently that are very similar in their premise, but very different in my opinion on view of them, and very different in the place that they come from. So the first book is one that I've seen talked about quite a lot on BookTube. I've seen quite a lot of very positive reviews for this on Goodreads, and it's Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. And it's published by a pretty large publisher, well, an absolutely massive publisher called Harper Collins. It's also been tipped as the hottest Sunday Times bestseller for 2017, and it's got lots and lots of hype around it. Lots of people have heard of it. The second book that I want to talk about today is completely different. It is The Storyteller, and it's by Kate Armstrong, who's actually a booktuber, and that's how I found out about the book, because I subscribed to her channel because I really enjoy hearing her reviews. And it's a story that she's written. It's been longlisted for the Republic of Consciousness Prize, but it's published by Holland House, which is a small independent press. So it hasn't had the big budget marketing that is behind Eleanor Oliphant, for example. I don't know Kate Armstrong, by the way. I only know her purely as a booktuber, someone that I've maybe briefly made comments on her channel. So there potentially is a slight bias around these two books, but I don't know Kate personally. So it was coincidence that I read these two books close together. And I read The Storyteller first, and then straight away afterwards I read Eleanor Oliphant. And as I began Eleanor Oliphant, it was immediately clear to me that the premises of these two novels are the same, in the sense that they are both coming-of-age novels centering on a young female character, and in both cases this young female character has experienced adversity in her early life, and mental ill health as a result. And both books are about the recovery from this early experiences and this mental ill health. They are also both told from the perspective of an unreliable narrator. So in the case of Eleanor Oliphant, it is Eleanor herself who narrates, but it becomes clear very, very early on that she has bits missing from her memory about her past, which she appears to be suppressing. In The Storyteller, the story is actually told by another character called Iris Buchanan, who is a older lady who Rachel, the young protagonist, meets when she is admitted to a mental health hospital after a suicide attempt. And Iris Buchanan tells the story of Rachel to Rachel. Which is a second person narrative, which takes a little bit of getting used to, but then you get into it after a while. And therefore we can never be quite sure in The Storyteller whether it's reality that she's telling, or whether it's Iris's own story mixed up, or whether it's wishful thinking. So both books have an unreliable narrator. Neither character is fine at the beginning of either novels. They are both starting from a point of dysfunction. In Rachel's case, in The Storyteller, she has attempted suicide, and we first meet her. Basically, she's a shell of herself, completely unable to function physically or mentally, curled up in this mental hospital. And we meet her through the eyes of Iris, who is at the doorway looking in on her. In Eleanor's case, we meet her at a point in life where she is functioning but not actually living. So we see her, as we enter the novel, Eleanor's life is about going to work, coming home, drinking herself into a stupor to forget, getting up and going to work again. So, for me, despite all the great reviews for Eleanor Oliphant, it was cliched. It was a cliched, easy read book, which actually for me became increasingly ridiculous and unbelievable as it went along. Having said that, The Storyteller is not an easy read. Its point of view is unusual because it's second person point of view. So it's Iris talking to Rachel and saying, so you saw this and you felt that. and that can take a little bit of getting used to. And it doesn't explain things. It doesn't try and explain why Rachel is in the hospital, what's happened before her. It doesn't try and explain and make explicit what happened to Iris. You have to pick up these things through what they say and feel. In terms of the writing, in Eleanor Oliphant, you are made to feel sympathy for Eleanor as a reader. You feel sorry for her, but you identify with the other characters, the normal characters. Eleanor's odd in many, many ways. I'll come back to that in a minute, but it's not someone you identify with. You would think to yourself, I could never be like her. Whereas in The Storyteller, Rachel is just like anybody else, and so is Iris, just like anybody else, and all the other characters are just like anybody else. There's not this big distinction between the mentally well and the mentally ill in The Storyteller, whereas I feel there is in Eleanor Oliphant, and it reminds me a little bit of the Silver Linings Playbook, which does exactly the same thing. You've got these two crazy characters and everyone else is normal. Well, that's just not like that. Craziness is a spectrum, and we all move along it depending on what's happening in our lives, you know, what experiences we had, what our childhood was like. When I was reading The Storyteller, there were real moments where you stop and think, and you kind of go, wow, yes, that must be awful to experience the world like that, or to not have that solid base in the world. And I just wanted to read a passage from The Storyteller that I think really sums up how beautiful the writing is, really, and how it can really make you think. So it's where, quite later on in the novel, where Rachel has left the mental hospital and she's trying to lead a normal life. She's trying to feel like a normal person. She's trying to get back what she lost, because, you know, mental illness and a suicide attempt, you know, literally that's highly traumatic, and it's you never quite trust yourself again following an experience like that. Can you ever trust your mind again if it's flipped out to that degree that you've tried to end your life? So it's very hard to get back into the world again. And she's working in this cafe and on the seafront with Sandy, who owns the cafe, and Jenny, who works for Sandy. And she's at the point in her recovery where she's realising that she's looking at the world through kind of a film, or a glass film. When she first came out of hospital, she wasn't actually aware that she was completely detached from the world. She was too self-absorbed, too unable to cope with making a cup of tea to really think about the fact that she was shut off from the world. But as recovery takes place, she's beginning to see that she's looking in on a world where she thinks and feels slightly different to other people, but she's beginning to notice it. So this is her bit where she begins to realise that actually some people have had different experiences to her, and maybe that makes them more resilient. So Jenny and Sandy are showing you a different way of life. Everything you have read or heard has told you that humanity, reaching out to humanity, is the way of the world. That from parent to child, from lover to beloved, there is a phenomenon known as unconditional love. That disagreement and anger, that declaration of what you think, feel, prefer, can go hand in hand with continued attachment. You have read all this and you have not believed it. You have known it to be fiction. For that reason, it has never surprised you that you have not felt it. But you have watched Jenny and Sandy disagree, and then you've heard them laugh together again. You have heard that Jenny and Damien have had to have a break, yet have seen each part of the other despite it all. What you have realised is that other people have something strong within them. For now, let us term it emotional security. That for them, relationships are not about protecting yourself as one apart. You have realised this, and you are taking the next step. You are wondering whether it can be this way for you. And I think that's really, that's really telling on Rachel's past, but it's not spelt out like it is in Eleanor Oliphant. You know, big fanfare, there's a newspaper story about how your mother set fire to the house with you in it, which actually, again, I find a little bit annoying in Eleanor Oliphant. There has to be some awful child abuse traumatic past that's drip fed to the reader, which makes me feel a little bit like a rubbernecker, you know, when you stop and look at an accident. It's like we're getting, I don't know, it's like we're getting kicks out of child abuse, which I don't particularly enjoy doing. Whereas in the Storyteller, it's very, very subtle. We don't know what's happened in Rachel's past, but clearly Rachel did not receive unconditional love. Clearly Rachel was maybe in a home where parents were always rowing but were unable to make up. She may have been in a home where her parents or parent had mental ill health themselves, and therefore their reactions were much more extreme. She may have been brought up in a home where disobeying her parents was seen as her not loving them. We don't know what happened to Rachel, but that passage tells us that she had a very different upbringing to Jenny and Sandy, who had clearly emotional security and a safe base from which to develop from. So we don't know what happened to Rachel, and we don't need to know. The point of this story, the Storyteller, is not to suddenly reveal this awful, shocking past that Rachel had, because anyone could end up with mental ill health for all sorts of reasons. It could just be that your mum was mentally unavailable to you because she was ill herself, or all sorts of things could have happened. Whereas in Eleanor Oliphant, she has to have this sordid, sensationalist, traumatic past. In mental ill health, and I talked about this in Silver Linings Playbook, there are very rare situations where people enter a fugue state, where their brain literally resets itself and they forget who they are, where they come from, how old they are, everything about their past they forget. They even may forget their accent and come out with a completely different accent. When this is dealt with in fiction, and I see this quite a lot in fiction that I don't think really understands mental ill health, it's like the memory is selective, and the traumatic event is the only thing that's wiped from memory, but everything else about the person remains. Well, it just doesn't work like that. Don't get me wrong, people repress traumatic early experiences, but repression is not the same as not knowing. And it's presented as if Eleanor doesn't know or cannot remember at all what happened in her past, to the point where she can't even remember that she had a baby sister. And I just think that's ridiculous. Whereas in Rachel's case, I've just realised my battery's about to run out, so I might have to finish this later. In Rachel's case, though she clearly has gaps in her memories, it's more because she's intentionally not wanting to recall them. So Eleanor, it's a bit ridiculous. And the way that Eleanor avoids finding out about her past is, apparently this is someone who's 30 years old, who is proficient on computers at work, but has no internet access at home, has no smartphone, has no laptop, has been able to avoid all the press about this sensationalist case for the last 15 years. And I'm sorry, I just don't buy it. In terms of how the story progresses, Eleanor Oliphant comes across as an autistic person. That's how she comes across. When you first meet her, she has very precise language, she's very pedantic, she seems to miss social cues. So I actually thought we were looking at someone with autism at the beginning of the novel. It turns out it's someone with a traumatic past and a mental health history. So I don't really get this character. I don't know who this character is. Rachel is in the Storyteller, is also distanced from other people, but not in this really odd, creepy way that Eleanor is presented as, which is, Eleanor comes across as someone that is not able to understand the actions of others. For Rachel, she's so self-absorbed, so caught up in herself, she doesn't really get what's happening. She doesn't understand how people can lead their lives so differently. For me, Eleanor is not a realistic portrait of someone who's suffered severe privation, someone who's been through the care system, someone who's lost people important to them, someone who can't trust their own parent. She comes across as someone with autism, and what else is not realistic with Eleanor is she's fully functional during the day, so she goes to work every single day, works really well, does all her work perfectly, but every night she comes home and drinks herself stupid with vodka because she doesn't want to recall her past. Those two things don't fit together. If you're struggling with mental ill health, you're not going to come across as absolutely fine during the day and then fall apart every night and get up again the next morning. You're going to be someone like Rachel, who approaches the world very tentatively and slowly begins to build a life for yourself. So Eleanor is just not true. And then let's come to the plot. Both plots involve a boy meets girl kind of scenario. In fact, the whole of the Storyteller is about Iris Buchanan trying to find a happy ever after for Rachel, because she used to write romantic novels, and also Iris didn't have a happy ever after for herself, which becomes more and more clear as the novel goes on, that something traumatic happened to Iris when she was married, and her family didn't know how to deal with that, and basically she ended up homeless as a result. So Iris wants Rachel to have a happy ever after, but of course real life's not like that. Whereas in Eleanor Oliphant, there's a kind of happy ever after. So suddenly this man Raymond at work takes an interest in Eleanor, and he is the salt of the earth, completely sorted, solid mental health, lovely kind of guy, which is great. There are people like that around. But it kind of makes that demarcation between the weird Eleanor and the normal Raymond. And then through Raymond, Eleanor meets lots of other salt of the earth, down to earth, really sorted, good working class people who basically embrace her and her quirks and make her feel like that, you know, life is worth living again. They befriend her and it's all wonderful, and it just, yeah. And it's this sense that they're normal and she's not, and so it's a sense that the reader is normal, and they're reading and pitying Eleanor. Whereas in Rachel's case, despite what Iris wants, Rachel meets people who aren't sorted. Rachel meets people who themselves are reeling from life events, who themselves are struggling with the world. So the first man she meets is struggling clearly to find a girlfriend. You get the sense that Rachel is out of his league in terms of looks, and that he is struggling to find a relationship and desperately wants a relationship, and he's shy and he's not very good at sex, and he generally sounds like an alright guy, but he sounds like he's got his own issues, and it doesn't work out, and she leaves him. And then she meets a middle-aged man who you're not sure about him to start, but you think, oh, is he a bit of a someone that is out to groom her or do something to her? And then it turns out that this man has lost his daughter. In Rachel, he sees his daughter and therefore wants to be close to her, but so he's not sorted either. He's a grieving man, you know. And all the characters in the Storyteller are normal people, and you kind of can see as a result of that there, by the grace of God go I, you know, whatever happens to us might put us in the same situation as Rachel. So they're real people, and Rachel is just one of them, and therefore you don't feel detached from Rachel. You feel like you could be Rachel, or you could be that middle-aged man. So, in summary, I think Eleanor Oliphant is a sensationalist story that sensationalises trauma and abuse, which I'm not particularly keen on, and that's the kind of hook, the pull, what really happened to Eleanor, which, you know, isn't enough for me, to be honest. It wasn't a big surprise. It wasn't a big surprise, sorry, big spoiler alert here, to find out that the mummy she talks to on the phone is actually dead and it's just an internalised voice of the mother. That was not a big surprise. That's a big cliche in fiction. You've only got to think of Psycho to know that that's a trope that's been well used. So if you want a cliched, relatively easy read that's not going to tax you too much, that'll make you feel good about yourself and make you think that could never happen to me, then Eleanor Oliphant's probably the one. If you want a happy ever after, Disney-fied ending, if you don't like fiction that's particularly challenging, go for Eleanor Oliphant. But if you want to be touched and moved and read some beautiful prose, Kate Armstrong's depiction of depression, this white room, is incredible and really, really strong metaphor that I hadn't come across before. And to really think about what it must be like to experience mental ill health, and then that recovery when you don't potentially have family there to support you, what that must be like. And to feel like you've really read something quite special, then read The Storyteller by Kate Armstrong. But be prepared to be challenged. Be prepared to have to read carefully. Be prepared to potentially read it again to really get a sense of what's happening. But certainly 5 stars all the way from me for Kate Armstrong's The Storyteller. I think it's a beautiful novel. She says it isn't autobiographical, and I completely believe that, but you can also tell that, like all of us, she's experienced some of these emotions and feelings, because we've all experienced depression and fear and anxiety and worry, and she's tapped into those feelings in herself. Whereas Gail Honeyman clearly hasn't experienced the traumatic past of Eleanor Oliphant, and clearly doesn't know very much about how it might impact on you as a person. So for me, Kate writes from a place of experience, whereas Gail Honeyman writes from a place of authority. This is what it must be like for this person. Sorry it's turned into a bit of a long one, but there was lots to say about these two novels, but I really, really want to recommend The Storyteller and give it a go. You know, small presses don't have the publicity of the large presses. I'm only a very small channel with barely any subscribers, but if any other booktubers pick up this book, please promote it, because it's an incredible piece of writing. And I'm going to be enjoying Kate Armstrong's channel even more now, knowing that her criticisms are as good as her writing, and I look forward to her next novel. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.